Tom Wilson spent 30 years with US Steel, developing his image processing techniques for revealing imperfections in product surfaces. His expert evidence in murder cases involving gunshot wounds has been accepted in federal court. In 1988, he began to apply that expertise to images from the Kennedy assassination.
You look at a picture and you see 30 shades of diversifying gray, whereas the machinery sees 256. As you peel away the layers of the photograph, as you were peeling an onion, each of the layers provides to the human being some information that lie within these various layers. And each layer or combination of layers will result in something that is embedded in there that has not been able to be brought out by the human eye. I don't think anyone has ever utilized the equipment to look at the Kennedy images. Because if they have, with the expertise that I know our government has had over the past many years, then I know they will come to the same absolute conclusion that I have. And it's just been an unbelievable burden ever since, because I know that President Kennedy was assassinated by somebody from the front and that there was a conspiracy. And the problem hasn't been the burden of knowing the truth that our president was assassinated in a conspiracy. The problem has been that in my efforts to bring hard, scientific, technical information to the public has been thwarted by everywhere I have turned. I've tried the media, I've tried the government, I've tried everything I know, and no one wants to look at the evidence.
Using image processing techniques undreamt of when Zapruder filmed the assassination, Tom has uncovered dramatic information hidden within this horrific footage.
As we go further into the brain, we are able to observe all of the damage that has occurred in this rear exit wound from the very top of the skull down into where the missile exited through the head. As you can see, this is the scalp area, the damage to the skull, the area of the skull that's been blown away by the incoming frontal missile. And now we can actually go down and see the brain, and the exiting bullet has gone through the brain, and you can see the path of the bullet here. Lee Harvey Oswald did not and could not have fired the fatal shot that killed our president.
Tom Wilson's ability to extract hidden information from the assassination pictures is based on established scientific principles.
This is photonics. This is the absolute science in the measurement of light. What is in these photographs and what is measured by the computer and backed up by hard scientific mathematical data. All of my findings can be reproduced.
Badgeman shooting from the grassy knoll was first revealed in Mary Moorman's picture in The Men Who Killed Kennedy in 1988. Tom's initial work confirmed his presence. This encouraged him to apply his technology to photographic records of the assassination.
The Zapruder film allowed me to be able to go in and look at the head wound initially. The autopsy photographs allowed me to verify that there were inconsistencies within, and the pristine Mary Moorman photograph allowed me to go in and actually measure the wound optically without image processing. As we go into the wound and as we expand the wound and magnify it, you can see that the pixel elements, or each one of these little dots, is represented by dark squares or light squares. Now, if there were no wound in the rear of President Kennedy's head, all of the squares would be the basic reflective value or the basic shade of gray that his normal hair coloring would be on this day. Every time, in my years of experience with this, when there is a concave or convex area that is a deformation of the overall image, there is absolutely no question that the case is, as it goes darker under this situation, that this is going from an area on the top of President Kennedy's head down into an extremely deep hole, because the entrance wound that supported this exit wound was fired from the right frontal area of President Kennedy, and it exited through the rear. Instead of trying to find shooters or gunmen in the photographs, I decided to concentrate on President Kennedy's massive rear-end head wound. And what this enabled me to do was to be able to go in, rebuild the head wound as a mold, use the data thereof, and track back from the head wound back to the source of the shooter. This is a mold that was reproduced from the data points obtained from the pristine Mary Moorman photograph. I took 8 vertical scans, 1, 2, and so forth, down to the bottom, and 750 horizontal scans, which allowed me to have 6,000 pieces of mathematical data that I could actually turn into a 3-dimensional mold. I was able to produce the exact replica, not to scale, of course, but an exact replica of President Kennedy's head wound. As you can see, this allowed me to be able to show the massive amount of material that was blown from the head into the air. As the bullet entered the right temporal area, it came within his head and fragmented into 2 directions. The right fragment is here, the left fragment is here. And this allowed me to determine, as you can see with all the flow of forces here, that all of the material was blown up and the entrance of the fragments came from below.
Having gathered extensive mathematical data from the assassination images, Tom went to Dealey Plaza for the first time. Taking precise measurements from the site, he correlated these with his photographic findings. The results were not as he anticipated.
When I came back and took these coordinates, which were mapped out using the machinery, not manual calculation, I could never put President Kennedy at the spot where the Zapruder film said was frame 313 when Badgeman was firing, because the projectile trajectory from Badgeman wasn't where Kennedy was. And when I put President Kennedy down the road 4 feet further, when Badgeman could hit him, Mary Moorman was in the wrong location, Mr. Zapruder wasn't fit, the fence was in the wrong place. I could not make anything fit. So I had to go back to Dallas, and I had to run more tests. And what I found out was something that I had overlooked all this time in looking at the photograph. President Kennedy's wound in his right temporal area is at an angle like this. It's coming out of the ground. And I said to myself, Tom, if the bullet was coming out of the ground, how is this possible? Because I never tried to determine where the bullet came from. I only know what it did to President Kennedy's head. This totally bewildered me, but I'm at the end of this mission. President Kennedy was assassinated by a man firing a missile from inside the manhole cover at the bottom of the steps in Dealey Plaza. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that that is exactly where that headshot came from.
Jack Brazil, a seasoned researcher of the assassination, believes that a gunman firing at Kennedy from the storm sewer is no wild theory. In 1992, he put his ideas to the test with a trained military team. They explored the subterranean world beneath Dealey Plaza.
After carefully analyzing and researching Dealey Plaza through the years, the only 2 spots that an assassin could actually hide and squeeze off around the presidential limousine would be the storm sewer that I'm standing in now and the storm drain, which is located directly behind the wooden picket fence that joins the triple underpass. But that's the only 2 spots that an assassin could hide in and actually squeeze off around and fire at the presidential limousine, and then, in lieu of that, been able to escape. It took us approximately 53 to 54 minutes, our very first trip. Now that was stopping and investigating and talking on the walkie-talkies, 2 coffee breaks, and then the second time it took 42 minutes, and the third trip it took 32 minutes, and the fourth trip it took 23 minutes. So we can rest assured that it would take an assassin approximately 20 to 30 minutes to actually escape Dealey Plaza underground. This ties in to the storm sewer in the center of Main Street, and it's easily accessible for a would-be assassin, and he could very easily have shot the president and used this route for an escape, which leads directly to the Trinity River.
The official autopsy photographs taken at Bethesda Naval Hospital on the evening of the assassination show no indication of a frontal entrance wound to Kennedy's head or exit wound from the rear. However, Tom Wilson has uncovered new evidence showing that these images have been manipulated to support the official line of a lone gunman firing from behind.
The dark areas represent material that are human and or environmental. The white areas represent mortician's materials such as wax. Some of the obvious areas of disguise are the ear, where you can see the wax material has been over top of the human ear. The entire face has been covered with mortician's wax and materials. And most important, the right temporal area, which is the entrance area of the incoming missile, has been filled with mortician's wax. I'm not saying that restorative art was not done to President Kennedy before he was buried. What I'm saying is, how can an autopsy photograph have restorative art on a cadaver?
Tom can prove that another official autopsy photograph, first seen in The Men Who Killed Kennedy and showing the back of the president's head intact, has been forged.
When image processing looks at this image, the real image that should be seen is this image. And all of the area that looks like it is solid white, a nice evenly coated white, is a photographic manipulation of the image. It is not a man-made mortician-type material. It is a painted image on a photograph. It is my concerted opinion that this photograph was manipulated for only one thing, and that was to hide the massive exit wound that occurred in the rear of President Kennedy's head.
Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin has spent his life serving his country. A veteran of 8 combat campaigns, he earned 21 awards and decorations. 15 years a paratrooper, he served in the elite special forces, the Green Berets. Just a few weeks after the assassination, he volunteered for specialist guerrilla training at Fort Bragg.
Almost all of the instruction in the guerrilla warfare school was classified. The most secret was the top secret training on assassinations and terrorism. And at that time, we went to a different building that had a double barbed wire fence around it and guard dogs in it. On the John F. Kennedy situation, that was brought to our attention as a classic example of the way to organize a complete program to eliminate a nation's leader while pointing the finger at a lone assassin. It involved also the cover-up of the assassination itself. We had considerable detail. They had a mock layout of the plaza in that area and showed where the shooters were and where the routes were to the hospital. I don't remember where those were now. They had quite a bit of movie film coverage, it seemed like, thinking back to that time, and some still photos of the grassy knoll and places like that. They told us that Oswald was not involved in the shooting at all. He was the patsy. He was the one that was set up. We did, myself and a friend of mine, form a very distinct impression that the CIA was involved in Kennedy's assassination. During a coffee break, we overheard one of the CIA instructors say to the other, "Things really did go well in Dealey Plaza, didn't it?" Or something to that effect. And that just reinforced or really added to our suspicions, and we really felt before the end of the training was over that one of those instructors may have been involved himself in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I had to do a lot of rethinking, and perhaps it's a way that soldiers of fortune are. I don't know, but I just then convinced myself, as did my friend, that it had to somehow be in the best interest of the United States government that Kennedy was killed. Otherwise, why would our own people have done it? Simple as that.
At Fort Bragg, 15 months after his training, Dan was summoned to meet an official from the CIA, a company man. David Vanek, a fellow officer in assassination training, also attended.
First, the company man took me aside and showed me his badge, his ID card, and he asked me if I would volunteer to kill a man, a United States citizen, a naval officer. Didn't tell me who it was at first. Now, I assumed what he was talking about was killing a man overseas. He asked me at first if I would accept an assignment to kill somebody. He didn't give me the name, but then I asked for the name, assuming it would be, like I said, overseas. And he gave me the name, William Bruce Pitzer. Hard name to forget, really, once you hear it. And so I told him yes. And then he said, well, you have to, he started to lay out the details of it. And the details included the fact that I would have to get him before he retired. And he retired in a very short period of time, if I remember correctly, and he was stationed at Bethesda Naval Hospital. So I'd have to actually get him here in the United States. Well, I refused, because that wasn't the way that we were trained that this was going to happen. We were supposed to be used as their assets, the CIA's assets, for use in assassinations overseas. In the United States, the mafia was supposed to supply what resources they need for killing somebody here in the United States. So he then asked David Vanek. He went over to David Vanek and talked to him. Now, I don't know what he talked to David Vanek about. He might ask him the price of ice cream. I don't know. But I never saw David Vanek after that day. Now, that was in August, the first week of August of 1965.
In November 1963, William Bruce Pitzer was head of the audio-visual unit at Bethesda Naval Hospital. A close colleague at the time was a young petty officer, Dennis David.
3 or 4 days after the assassination, I walked in his office and I saw he was working on some film. He had a movie editor, one of those reel-to-reel that runs across the screen, and he showed it to me, and it was a 16-millimeter film of the autopsy. There were also some slides. He had some slides that he had that showed tissue slides, and also showed some slides of President Kennedy that were taken while he was on the table at the morgue. And we looked at him, kind of horrified, I guess you would say, at the seriousness of the wound. But I remember one of the things that I remembered was that they had a picture of Kennedy laying on the table, and it was a front profile, if you will, or front view. And the only thing we saw was a little hole about here in the temple. And then another photograph, or another slide that Bill had, showed a huge gaping hole here in the back. And so Bill and I logically assumed that the wound was a frontal entry wound, as opposed to what the Warren Commission later said being shot from behind.
Dennis left Bethesda for a new posting, but in November 1966, a colleague gave him some distressing news regarding his old friend Bill Pitzer. He'd been found dead in a pool of blood in his studio at Bethesda. The official verdict was suicide. Lying face down on the floor, a .38 revolver by his side, he had a bullet wound in the right temple.
When the occupational therapist had told me this, I remember I reminded, I said, that doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, because Bill was left-handed, And, because we used to kid him all the time when playing bridge about being a southpaw, because sometimes he'd deal in reverse. Instead of dealing them in the correct sequence, he'd deal them in the opposite way, and we'd kind of harass him about it.
There are grave doubts about Pitzer's alleged suicide. His left hand had been so mangled, as if tortured, that his wedding ring could not be removed and given to his widow.
Bill had told me shortly before he left Bethesda, which was around the 7th of December of '65, he told me that he was planning on retiring because he had enough time in and he was wanting to get out, and that he also said he had some damn lucrative offers from some TV networks, and other people have asked me why I think he was assassinated, and I think it was because that with him retiring, they, and I don't know who they are, were afraid that he would take these pictures that he and I had seen, this 35 millimeter and the 16 millimeter film, that he would take them, and that if he went to work for a major studio, that they would use them, or he would have them aired, and that would really, blow some people out of the water if that would have transpired. I could be wrong, I could be all wet, but I do know those films exist because I was there, I saw the damn things.
I am absolutely certain that the name that I was given underneath those pine trees in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the first week of August was William Bruce Pitzer. I put it completely out of my mind from 1965 until 1993. And I was watching a special in November '93 about the assassination of Kennedy. I think it was a special by Jack Anderson. And at the end of that special, on the television, they rolled a list of 42 names of people who had met a violent death that were somehow associated with the assassination or the cover-up or the autopsy or something. And I was sitting there in my living room watching that, and the name William Bruce Pitzer came over the screen. And it made me go right back to that day in August of 1965. That was the William Bruce Pitzer that I was asked to kill, unless there's two William Bruce Pitzers that worked at Bethesda Naval Hospital. That man, the name of the other Green Beret that was approached by the CIA agent in August of 1965 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, was David H. Vanek, captain, who went through the same training I did, same class I was in. And I have tried, ever since I saw the name William Bruce Pitzer come out on that screen, I've tried to find him. And I've been totally unsuccessful. I sent letters to the special office and the Retired Services Directorate, where they'll take a letter that you send them with a man's name and serial number, and they'll forward it to him. Or if he's deceased, they'll send it back to you. I got no response from them, so I finally sent another follow-up letter and demanded a response, or I threatened to go to Senator D'Amato to help me on the response. And then I did get a response, but the response was that David H. Vanek never existed in the United States Army.
But Dan still has published Army orders proving that Captain David H. Vanek was with him at the Special Warfare Center.
Recognizing just what kind of a person I was, and which I am hopefully no longer, it is not an easy thing to do. It would be easier for me to just melt into the woodwork and let my family, especially my grandchildren, think of me as kind of the friendly old giant that helps them do things and plays with them, rather than what I've done in the past. And I know that when this, if it is made public, the information that I've given will adversely affect my relations with my family. And I just hope and pray that our love survives it. And I hope and pray that it does some good for this nation.